All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We've been really digging into recent events in India, looking at things around mid-June 2025.
That's right. Trying to get a handle on the political and economic climate, especially after those 2024 elections.
Exactly. So the goal today is, well, to unpack what's been happening, figure out the key dynamics facing Prime Minister Modi's government now, and really get to the heart of why it all matters.
It's a really interesting moment. A lot has shifted, even if some things look stable on the surface.
Definitely. And that shift, I think that's the perfect place to start. The 2024 election outcome was huge, wasn't it?
Absolutely fundamental. I mean,
Okay.
for the first time in 10 years, the BJP didn't get that standalone majority in the Lok Sabha.
Which meant Modi had to form a coalition, the NDA, relying on partners to stay in power through 2029.
Precisely. And leading a coalition, well, it's just a different beast compared to having your own outright majority. Requires constant attention.
Yeah, the material we looked at described it as needing nonstop effort, like trying to keep a whole bunch of plates spinning at the same time, keeping everyone happy.
It demands a different approach. More negotiation, more balancing acts,
Yeah.
less room for purely unilateral moves, maybe.
Right. But even with that coalition constraint, it's not like the government's been sitting on its hands, has it?
Not at all. They've been pretty active, pushing forward on several fronts. Seems like they're keen to show they're still very much in charge.
Like passing that Walk Amendment Act, that certainly made waves.
Oh, big waves. Very controversial. The opposition came out swinging, calling it unconstitutional. It definitely signals they're pursuing their agenda, but perhaps facing louder pushback now.
And it wasn't just that one act. There was that huge overhaul, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, kicking in on July 1st, 2024.
Yeah, rewriting the criminal and civil codes, that's no small thing. It shows the basic machinery of government is, well, it's still churning out major changes.
And politically, that move with the caste census alongside the regular one, that felt quite strategic.
A very sharp move. A caste census has been something the opposition wanted for ages. So by announcing it themselves, the government kind of, took ownership of the issue.
It neutralizes a potential point of attack and lets them control the narrative. Clever stuff.
Definitely smart politics.
But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Alongside all this government activity, there's this observation cropping up about Modi himself, that his public persona feels, well, different.
Yeah, that's a recurring theme in the analysis we saw, this idea of the missing O-ring.
Right. We all remember the rock star PM image, don't we? The massive rallies, those really fiery speeches.
Oh, yeah, the energy was incredible. Slogans like Bharat Mata Ki Jai, whipping up the crowds. He had this real knack for connecting.
He really did. But the descriptions now are, well, contrasting. Recent speeches are apparently sounding less fiery, maybe a bit more scripted.
That's the perception.
Yeah.
Less spontaneous, maybe less of that raw energy. It feels like a shift from that, high drama style we saw before.
Like that speech in Nalanda after Operation Sindoor. That was classic Modi, wasn't it? Talking about Sindoor running in his veins, promising unimaginable punishment.
Exactly. Pure political theater and incredibly effective at the time. The feeling now is just that we're seeing less of that specific intensity.
Okay, so if that signature style seems maybe dialed back a bit, what are the theories? Why the perceived change?
Well, a few ideas are floating around. One is just that it's a bit of a political lull. There aren't any huge national elections breathing down their necks right now.
The next big ones are state-level Bihar, then Assam, West Bengal, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, down the line.
Right. And the thinking is maybe Modi thrives on that high-stakes election adrenaline. Without that constant campaign pressure, perhaps the public energy level naturally dips a bit.
Like an engine idling between races. Makes sense. He's been campaigning almost constantly for years.
Could be. Another factor might just be, time in office. 11 years is a long stretch.
Yeah, the day-to-day grind of governing is different from rallying crowds. Maybe it just becomes more routine, less about constant mobilization.
Possibly. And it's interesting, even big moments like, say, waving the flag in Kashmir for that new rail link, or opening all those refurbished train stations.
The Amrit Bharat stations, yeah.
Those are described as feeling a bit more like, photo ops. Less like moments that really grab the national imagination the way similar things might have before.
So the impact feels a little muted, perhaps? The context has changed? Or maybe the delivery?
Could be a combination. It raises questions about whether the old playbook still resonates in quite the same way.
Okay, moving alongside this perceived change in style, there's this other major tension point. The dynamic between India's diversity and the BJP's specific brand of nationalism, this seems to be fueling some friction.
Oh, absolutely. That's a critical underlying tension. India is just incredibly diverse languages, religions, cultures.
And there was that striking detail mentioned about the government apparently needing to borrow Muslim leaders from other parties for some international representation.
Yeah, that detail stood out. It's seen by some as pointing to a potential gap within the BJP's own ranks, maybe not fully reflecting the country's diversity, which can then create challenges both at home and abroad when projecting an inclusive image.
It definitely suggests a sort of disconnect, and unfortunately, the material also highlights some really worrying incidents on the ground that seem linked to this growing polarization.
They are deeply concerning, like that BJP MLA in Rajasthan reportedly plastering hate posters on a mosque in Jaipur, linking worshippers to terrorists. That's incredibly inflammatory.
And then the story from Agra about a self-styled Gaurakshak killing a biryani seller.
Right, the idea that selling biryani is somehow a threat. It sounds almost surreal, but it shows how extreme narratives can tragically lead to violence.
And you can almost see a line connecting these incidents to some of those divisive slogans mentioned, like "Ekain to save Hain" or "Batenj to Katen."
Exactly. The political rhetoric, even if it doesn't explicitly call for violence, can absolutely create an environment where divisions sharpen and danger increases. It really matters what leaders say and how it's interpreted.
Let's shift gears a bit to Kashmir. Modi's visit there was significant, wasn't it? His first since those awful Pahalgam killings.
Yes, a very symbolic visit. And the reports mention the terrorists involved in those killings are still eluding capture, which adds another layer.
So the visit was about projecting strength, projecting normalcy.
That seemed to be the goal. You had the visuals waving the flag, opening that big all-weather rail link, the world's highest railway bridge, new Vande Bharat trains for the valley. It's all about signaling progress, integration.
Powerful symbols, for sure. But the analysis we saw contrasted this with what some saw as a missed political opportunity back in Delhi.
Right. Modi's absence from an all-party meeting where the opposition was actually offering, unconditional support on the Kashmir situation.
That absence was noted. Why skip that chance for unity?
It struck some observers as odd. You're projecting unity on the ground in Kashmir, but then missing a chance for political unity back in Parliament, especially when, as noted, Kashmir's own Chief Minister, Omar Abdullah, was calling for everyone to come together. Local voices were echoing that too.
So a kind of contrast between the push for unity locally in Kashmir and maybe a different dynamic playing out nationally.
That's how it's framed.
Yeah.
It highlights the complexity trying to manage the narrative in Kashmir while navigating the broader, sometimes more polarized national political scene.
Okay, let's talk economy, because this seems to be another area where there's a disconnect described between, say, the official narrative and maybe the lived reality for lots of people.
Yeah, that's a major theme. The government talks up shining India, but the data points highlighted suggest a tougher picture for many households.
What specific things are mentioned?
Well, significant inflation is hitting hard.
Yeah.
And crucially, real wages are reportedly shrinking.
So pay packets aren't keeping up with rising prices.
Exactly. People's actual buying power is going down. Then you add other signs: rising defaults on gold loans, which often indicates distress.
And that huge drop in school enrollment, 1.5 crore fewer kids. That's worrying.
Very worrying. Plus, businesses apparently facing sluggish demand, stuck with unsold inventory. These aren't just abstract figures. They paint a picture of real economic pressure.
And the opposition, are they managing to capitalize on this?
They're trying, it seems, but the analysis suggests their efforts aren't really landing effectively. Jaram Ramesh's comment about stealing Mangal Sutras is mentioned.
Trying to link gold loan defaults to government policy, presumably.
Right. But it's described as coming across as maybe a cheap shot, something that didn't really galvanize public opinion or put serious pressure on the government. It just didn't seem to stick.
So even with these economic headwinds, the opposition isn't finding much traction. Meanwhile, the government's focus seems to be on those big infrastructure projects, railways, EV buses, and things like the caste census.
Yeah, it could be seen as a strategy, right? Highlight the big visible projects, make savvy political moves like the census, and perhaps draw attention away from the pinch people are feeling in their wallets.
Well, the data suggests maybe entrepreneurial spirit is a bit dampened and the middle class is feeling squeezed.
That's the tension. Grand projects moving forward, but maybe underlying economic stress isn't being fully addressed, or at least the solutions aren't being felt yet.
Which brings us to the opposition itself. If they're struggling to make issues like the economy stick, what's the overall assessment of their position?
Generally not looking very strong or unified right now. The Congress Party, led by Rahul Gandhi, is often described as being sort of stuck in righteous indignation mode. Vocal, yes, but lacking a clear strategic plan to really challenge the government effectively.
And the wider INDIA bloc, the big anti-BJP alliance.
That's portrayed as a collection of parties, finding it hard to agree, struggling for cohesion. Internal squabbles seem to be weakening their overall impact. It's tough to present a united front when you can't quite get everyone on the same page.
So the real challenges to the BJP are maybe coming more from the regions.
That seems to be the case. Parties like Mamata Banerjee's Trinamool in West Bengal or Kejriwal's AAP in Delhi and Punjab, they're highlighted as being much more effective, state by state.
They've actually beaten the BJP in direct contests in their home states.
Exactly. They have a proven track record locally that the National Alliance is struggling to replicate.
So it sounds like the opposition's inability to really leverage the economic situation or even find a unified voice on something like Kashmir has maybe given the government a bit more breathing room than they might have expected post-election.
That's a fair reading of the analysis, yeah.
Mhm.
Without that strong coordinated pressure, the NDA government, despite the new coalition complexities, isn't facing the kind of immediate, intense heat it might otherwise. The BJP still wants its double-engine Sarkar model, but managing those central allies adds a whole new layer.
Okay, let's quickly touch on the BJP's core ideology, the Hindutva agenda. How is that playing out now? Balancing it with governance and coalition partners must be tricky.
It's definitely a tightrope. We talked about the Waqf Amendment Act that fits the ideological mold, but it hit significant legal and political roadblocks. The Supreme Court stepping in forced what was called a rare retreat,
So ideology bumps up against legal realities and opposition.
and potentially coalition partner sensitivities too, though that's less explicit in this material. But you also see pressure from within the Hindu right itself.
Like the calls to reclaim temples. The Ajmer Sharif case was mentioned.
Exactly. There are growing demands from certain groups to pursue these claims more aggressively, which puts the government in a difficult spot. It was interesting seeing Modi send that chadar to the Ajmer shrine, maybe a gesture of balance.
Trying to walk that line. And this all puts pressure on that Places of Worship Act from 1991, doesn't it? The one meant to stop new disputes.
Huge pressure. The dilemma for the BJP is whether to push for amending or repealing it, which could unleash countless disputes, or uphold it and potentially frustrate parts of their base. It's a real governance challenge.
And tying back to Kashmir quickly, the security situation there remains critical, right? Especially for things like the Amarnath Yatra, for tourism.
Absolutely. That promise Modi made of unimaginable punishment needs to translate into visible safety on the ground. The credibility of their Kashmir policy and things like the pilgrimage depend on it, especially if attacks are still happening.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together, the coalition, the leadership style questions, the economy, the opposition's state, the ideological balancing act. What's the takeaway for the road ahead? Is this a temporary phase or is a bigger shift needed?
The next period looks crucial. You've got those state elections coming up. Bihar is massive because allies like Nitish Kumar and Chandrababu Naidu are key, not just there, but for the central coalition's stability. Then Maharashtra, Haryana, big tests.
And the BJP's old tactic of splitting opposition parties, is that harder now they need their own allies?
It could be trickier, yeah. The dynamics definitely shift when you're managing your own coalition. Internationally, Modi got the G7 invite, which is positive diplomatically.
Though even that had a ripple, with Canada's PM mentioned as taking some heat for it.
Right, so even the international stage isn't completely smooth sailing. It really does seem to come back to that central question about Modi's connection, that missing Zing.
Can he recapture it? Or does he need to?
Well, the analysis suggests this disconnect. The government can point to real achievements, infrastructure reforms, the caste census, but they don't seem to be firing up the public imagination in the same way.
And maybe that's because the one nation, one party vision inherently clashes with India's diversity, and coalition politics forces a less, well, dominant approach.
That clash point seems key. Governing a coalition in diverse India might just require a different style than commanding a majority. So, is a strategy reset needed? Less chest-thumping, more listening, more inclusion maybe?
Or is he just pacing himself, conserving energy for the next big electoral push?
That's also possible. He's a very strategic politician.
So wrapping up our deep dive based on this June 2025 snapshot, India seems like a place of contrasts, A government that's numerically stable via the NDA, but facing significant tests, economic pain, social friction, and the political juggling act of a coalition.
And that whole discussion about the missing casing, it's really less about just one person's speaking style and more about whether the political approach that worked so well before can still connect and unite in these changed circumstances. With economic worries and coalition demands adding pressure.
The challenges are clear. Keeping the coalition happy, tackling those economic issues effectively, dealing with an opposition that might be fragmented but still holds regional power.
Definitely. And given Prime Minister Modi's proven ability to shape political narratives over the years, the big question we leave you with is this. Can he adapt again, find a new way to resonate across India's spectrum, or are we seeing the start of a more fundamental shift in the country's political landscape?
Something to definitely keep watching. That's all for this deep dive.